Today, I'll be talking you through how I create the Zodiac Circle, a decorative esoteric mat. For an extended ASMR version of this video, you'll find a link in the description to my second channel. As always, we start off with natural veg tan leather, approximately 2.5 millimeters thick. It actually uses for this anyway, it uses the shoulder of the cow. It tends to be quite a firm cut of leather, especially in the 2.5 mil thickness, which makes it ideal for creating pieces that require some sort of rigidity, such as the mats that I'm creating here. Once the strip's been cut down, I'll then subdivide that again into more manageable pieces, and the dimensions of these pieces are done in such a way that they fit inside the clicker press that I'm going to use in a moment, and they're the right dimensions for the die cutter that will be aligned to cut the pieces out. I always do this in such a way to avoid as much wastage as possible, but to be honest, there's always some sort of wastage, but I'll use that wastage for prototypes or testing. Once I've prepared all of the pieces of leather, I'll just try and flatten them out as much as I can to make it easier to work with. And I'll just check over to see if there's any imperfections that I'm not quite happy with. Every piece of leather does have its quirks. Nothing's perfect. In fact, it adds character. But sometimes I'll find a large scar that doesn't quite work for me. And then I'll take these pieces over to the laser cutter. This device has been perfect for me for cutting circles. Cutting circles out of leather freehand is really quite difficult. And also there's the added benefit as well that I get to etch the leather at the same time and imprint my designs into it. I don't cut too deep into the leather because I don't like the idea of the roughness and perhaps dirt particles collecting inside the engraving. So I do just enough of a light passing to just show up the design. And then for this particular piece, which has the cut in the middle, I have to hand sand the inside at this stage. I can't leave it till later because it gets much more difficult. It requires a little bit of delicacy because of where it's positioned on the mat. And now we're at the stage where I have to case the leather, which is putting multiple sprays of water over it. I give each one about a minute to sink in, and about 15 minutes later, once it's sat there, it's about ready to start doing stamping with, which is what I'm doing here. I'm using a jig made from cardboard, and it helps me align these stamps onto the circle. Normally, back in the old days, I would have used a ruler to measure this out to make sure it was absolutely in the center. Admittedly, that didn't always work out for me, especially being a circle, but having this piece of cardboard has really helped. So I'll use the 4-ton clicker press here to apply the pressure and emboss the leather. And what I'll do, I'll actually spin this around 180 degrees. And that's because the clicker press that I have isn't perfectly perpendicular to the base. So the further out from the spindle, it seems to like jut upwards a little bit. So to make sure there's even pressure everywhere, I just spin the whole thing around and press it down again. What's quite important here is the oiling process that I'm doing. When leather tends to get wet and then dry again, and especially if you dye leather and it dries, the leather gets very, very stiff, and the oil just helps to add moisture back into the leather again. It's quite nice on natural leather like this here because once it all dries, it slightly darkens the leather, because the leather as it comes naturally is quite pale, and I just like that slightly darker patinaed look that the neatsfoot oil gives when you rub it in there. and I am applying the oil into the leather here with sheepskin. So I buy scraps of sheepskin on eBay, and then I trim the fur down to make it a bit more manageable, and then I use it as my applicator. This is a roll of red dyed pig suede, and here I'm using an offcut of the leather piece as a kind of like template to work out how large I need to cut the circle. I really should come up with a more permanent solution of doing that, but at this stage, this is what I'm working with. And then I'll just use the scissors here to trim that piece of suede out. And this piece of suede will only apply to the cutout version of the Zodiac circle, and it'll go in the center, which is quite a nice decorative piece and allows the optional solid etched brass coin to sit on top of. Then I'll place the piece of suede under the Zodiac circle, and then I'll kind of like trace a line into the suede so that when I come to glue this, I know not to go over the line, otherwise it'll ruin the center. This is where I start using a water-based contact cement adhesive. I don't know if my words just slipped out there. Water-based contact adhesive. There you go. And I'll apply this sparingly over the leather, making sure that I get every piece. And you don't want to apply too much on the leather because it makes it more awkward to press the pieces together. If it clumps up, it tends to make it harder for the leather to get press fit together. And especially on the edges, kind of see a separation of the leather, and it ruins the effect of the edges. And in the past I've used barge cements, and it's quite a thick, stodgy glue, and I've not had much success with that. But this particular type of glue, the water-based, I really like, and I wouldn't go back to anything else. Pressing that piece of leather onto the suede is always a touchy moment. I always have to make sure I line that up perfectly. Once the glue's been applied to the leather, I give it about 5 minutes until it goes dry and tacky, and then I press fit them together with the help of this jig. I don't know if you've ever used contact cement, but if you ever accidentally touch two pieces together, it's an absolute nightmare to pry apart. I've done it a couple of times, and it's ruined my leather. It leaves like creases in the leather where you've had to try and pull and tear it. It's not very forgiving. So luckily, with the help of the jig that lines everything up for me, I can get it pretty good. It will never be perfect, but that's what the sanding process is for in a moment. But it gets me like 90% of the way there. And then I'll take these over to the clicker press again. I'll sandwich them between two pieces of leather just to protect the surface. And then I'll use the pressure from the clicker press to help adhese the two pieces together. And it'll also help straighten the leather as well, get rid of any bends or kinks from the earlier processes. I found this to be a really solid way to help press these pieces together. For good measure, I'll then use these flat head pliers, I think they're called. I have stuck some thin leather over the ends just to make sure that the tool doesn't leave any accidental impressions in the leather. And then I'll go all the way around, just applying that pressure. Because as I said earlier, making sure the edges are perfectly tight together is really important. And then I'll just go around, and for this particular piece, because I laser cut it, it just helps to get rid of the charring. And at the same time, where there's any slight misalignment on the two pieces of leather being adhesed together, it'll just flatten all that out. Having said that, when you do sand leather like this, you end up with imperfect edges. And by edges, I mean surface edges that need trimming off. And that's where I will use the bevel edger, one of my favorite tools to help get rid of that excess bit of leather and round those edges off. One thing that I like about doing the bevel edging on the Zodiac circles is that because it is a nice sweeping circle, I can usually pull this off in one move without breaking those strands. I can't really pull that off normally on pieces that have corners, but yeah, it's really, really satisfying. And you'll notice that I use my hands to turn the leather rather than use the tool to go around. Does that make any sense? I don't know. Okay, now I'll put the piece inside of the stitching pony, which is normally reserved to help hold a piece of leather so you can start stitching. But in my case, when it comes to painting the edges, or sorry, I should say dyeing the edges, it's quite a useful tool. So this marker pen, you purchase these and they come empty, and I fill mine up with different colors of leather. And it's absolutely incredible for doing the edge dyeing on leather pieces. As you can see here, you can't really slip like you might do with any other applicator. It just seems to give a great level and consistent dyeing amount of dye as you apply it. And I'll normally do this in 2 coats. By the time I come to the second coat, it's a really smooth and slick surface, and it feels quite nice to run the pen along the edge, almost like if I was painting a glass edge. And then I will use this new tool that I recently acquired, and I'll use this to paint edge coat, which is like an acrylic paint onto the edge. The bit that I dyed just now is more of an undercoat that I apply. It just helps to hide any mistakes that I make, which is, useful because I often make mistakes. And before, I would use a pen applicator to apply this. If you think of like a quill where you have to keep dipping the pen into the ink over and over again to write with, it worked in much the same way and was quite annoying and time consuming to use. But this big drum is constantly fed the edge coat paint, and I can just do everything in one pass without having to refill it. And again, I'll probably give this about an hour to dry, and then I'll go over with a second coat. But you get a really wonderful, smooth edge when you apply this. And here we go. It's time to pack everything in the presentation box. So this particular piece comes with a letter to say thank you and whatnot. It also can come with an optional etched solid brass coin. This is a divination coin, got a yes and no on it, and that actually fits directly in the center of the mat. And there you have it. That is the Zodiac circle, all done and dusted.